here.
Hello, I am Dorothée Benamou and I'm working at the National Library of France as part of the web archiving team. And this presentation is about how we manage the tension between hosting large amounts of copyrighted data with limited access and meeting researchers' needs to explore this data with open source tools, softwares. So since the early 2000s, the National Library of France has been collecting the French web. That is to say that we regularly collect samples of the cultural production that are online and which are, as you know, very ephemeral. So this allows researchers to study the political, social, scientific debates that either primarily take place on the web or at least find significant echoes there, and to study as well the major transformation that the web has brought into every aspect of our lives. So the BNF is authorized to do this under a law from 2006. And what does it mean to actually collect the web? So we use software, web crawlers, bots to do so. We are using open source tools that we develop together with other institutions and organisms that are part of the International Internet Preservation Consortium, the IIPC. And so you might be familiar with the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine. So Internet Archive is part of the IIPC too, and we use the same kind of tool for accessing and browsing past versions of the web. The main difference is that we focus on the French web, so we have more comprehensive collections of websites hosted or produced in France. So what is the scope of the collections of web archives that are available? So obviously we cannot preserve everything. So we try to collect representative samples regularly of the French web. And our harvesting model is a mixed one, combining two types of crawls. Once a year we run a national domain crawl or a broad crawl. For this crawl there is no selection process. We are collaborating with diverse organisms to gather lists of domain names that are hosted in France, and for each of these domains, we are collecting around 2,000 URL. So last year it represented almost 6 million domain names. And complementary to this, we also have thematic or curated crawls. So these are thematic selections made by a network of librarians mostly, but also researchers and associations within their fields of expertise. These selected websites, they are harvested more in depth and more frequently, so at frequencies ranging from daily to annually. They cover all disciplines, literature, sciences, history, and we also have thematic crawls, for example, for the COVID-19 pandemic, or for the Olympic Games, or for the electoral, for the elections. So to develop this example, for each major French elections, we collect the electoral debates around the election. It means we select websites, blogs, social networks when possible, and diverse online content from political parties, from unions, candidates, associations, scientists, humorists, pollsters, and from any citizen expressing themselves on the internet about the election, in forum, for example. So how do we make this data more open to scientific research? So these are great material for researchers, but there are several limitations on those collections. So the first one is that due to legal restriction, due to privacy and copyright concerns, the web archives can only be accessed on-site at the BNF in the research reading rooms or in a network of 20 regional libraries across France that are specifically listed in a decree. So this is why they can be considered as closed data. Another major challenge is that there are massive data, so we try to provide specific tools and services to allow to explore those data, such as Pandoray within the BNF Data Lab. And finally, there are digital artifacts, so there are traces or records of what was on the web at a given period. And if researchers want to use them for their research, they have to understand how they were constituted, the intellectual and technical choices that were made, and they have to be aware of the biases, and they have to deal with the incompleteness, the multiple version of the same page, maybe time inconsistencies, etc. Making them more open for research remains a major challenge, and this is one of the issues that Pandoray is addressing, and I will let Guillaume explain you why.
All right, so hi everyone. I'm just going to try to stick that right here, if it works. My name is Guillaume Levrier. I'm a political scientist. I'm a researcher, and as such, again, we've talked about this earlier today already. For me, the practice of doing research is about building a method that serves an epistemological goal, trying to build something that we try to call scientific knowledge. The thing is, today, that label is very rarely enforced. What we call scientific knowledge in the common speech is usually things that you find in articles that are in peer-reviewed journals. But what that means de facto is often left unsaid, as in the reviewers that are supposed to vet the research usually don't have access to the raw data or to the method. So it becomes more, and again, it depends on the discipline, but it becomes more about the plausibility of a narrative rather than the actual work. Hence the need, again, this is why we're here, for tools that are free, open source, with intelligible source code, whose execution can be decentralized when it's possible, and whose outputs are under the control of the user, and then that's how we connect with the previous presentation. We hope that having both the process and the tools available over a long period of time enables to give us a better chance as being able to reproduce the work. And hence the very relevant question we had on the hardware. It's true that sometimes the hardware can be a big issue, but since it's the best we can do given the means that we have. But as researchers, we're always trying to reach all available data sources for one's research, which collides a little bit with the idea of being reproducible and accessible to most, which is why I started building Pandoray, which is a software that does three things, or that has many processes that can be abstracted into three things: harvesting data, standardizing data, and exploring this data. So basically how it works is that it has a first process called Flux that is basically connected to different types of APIs that it calls in a way that is respectful of the API in order not to drown it. Then, so the data it queries has to be abstractable as documents to be poured into Zotero, which is useful because researchers usually, even if they're not very good at using computer, they know how to use Zotero. And Zotero is both a web service, it's a desktop software, it's an SQL database behind it. So it provides a lot of tools, and all documents can have attachments as well, and notes. So it's quite a powerful open source software, and I think everyone is thankful in the scientific community for Zotero. And types is a series of data viz systems that are calibrated to explore corpuses of documents that rely on D3.js. What does this mean in the context of the web archives at the National Library of France, so the BNF? It means that we need to first identify that when you're on site, when you have access to the archives that again are protected, you need to check whether there is something in the archive that's interesting to you, and then you do the full circle of querying the data, abstracting it into Zotero, which is tricky because you cannot get the data out, then visualizing the corpus, and then having the opportunity of looking at each capture of web pages that you want to explore into the web archive browser. So this is the tension that we had that Dorothée mentioned earlier. It's open source, but it's closed data. Of course, we're not the first people to have that problem. but we have to negotiate the specific constraints that we have, both in terms of law in France and in terms of technical capacity from that institution to be able to provide access to such data. So quickly, this is how it looks like. It's the form, it's a search engine. You check that you have a number of results that's interesting to you. Here I was looking for Fanon in the 2002 election in France. And once you are in that software, in Pandore, it detects that you are within a network that is authorized, gives you the opportunity to do the same request on the same data set, tells you that you have, so this is a different request actually, it's on Dolly the little sheep. It tells you that you have requests under captures that are relevant to your request over time in the collection that's relevant, and gives you an example of the kind of websites that contain those terms, because those are full text indexed collections. And then the solution that we found is that we send only the metadata to Zotero. So we do not upload the actual content of the fields, but we only selected, we remapped the documents and selected a series of metadata, not all of them, that were relevant to the corpus. And so here you have an example. You have the website title, the host, the date, and we used to pass a JSON object, stringified JSON object at the short title, because it's common to all Zotero documents. But now we cannot do that anymore. We used to be able to do that. So now we upload notes instead. And then we send it back to Pandore when you can see it as a corpus. Here you have in blue the captures and the links towards documents that are different. And so when you click a link, if you are within the BNF, it sends a query and gives you access to the full content. So it tells you how many captures there are over time. And you can look for words within the content. So it tells you, and it gives you a short excerpt. So you can have an idea of how relevant the term you're looking for is in the context of that page. So the way we found to conceptualize this kind of relationship that enables us to build open software with, in that instance, closed data, is the one-way mirror model. So in this model, there is, we consider the web archive as a bit like a suspect in an interrogation room. And they have a one-way mirror on their side, so they only see themselves, and you can ask them questions. So we built that model or metaphor based on three properties. One is that you can harvest the data when you're in the room, but you cannot have write access to it. So you can talk to the person, but you cannot change what the person knows. You can take parts of each record, so here the metadata, and not the whole thing, but only some fields that we determined. But you cannot send requests when you're away. You have to be in here to ask the questions. And you can come back for highlight on a specific piece. So that refers to that part of the exploration when you click on a node and send, you request information on that specific node. But you cannot take the whole body out. So you cannot ask for the whole corpus to be extracted, because there would be a risk that then you would just put it on a USB key and walk home with it. So that's how we built our model. Thank you for your attention. We'll be taking questions.
Are there any questions in the room?
Yep. Hi.
So how much of this is opposed by rights holders on a continual basis? Are you always fighting the problem that you have to be careful as to what people can take out of the closed room?
Yes.
Please repeat the question.
Oh, yeah, sorry, the question. I should know that. So the question is, how do we manage the fact that everything is under the rights of the creators, of the authors, and how much we have to fight that? So there is a context that is still to be, I guess, proven by practice. But basically, the idea is that you're not justified in taking anything out of there, except if you're a researcher and you need to take an excerpt to show good faith that what the argument actually sends back to something that is empirically in the database. So if if a researcher reads your paper and wants to know more or to check that what you're quoting is actually accurate, and you have that number of documents that are in the family of the phenomenon that you're trying to describe, they can come to BNF and use hopefully the same tool on the same data and find the same results. So it's extremely coercive in a way. There's no way of taking out the data. You're supposed to be able to quote it. And that's the liberty I took as a researcher to just show you those little sentences. Also, I think this is still on the live web, so you might find it. But so yeah, it's very narrow. And it's a problem for research, but for now, it's how it is.
We have maybe time for one more question. Otherwise, let's thank the speakers.